Hello, happy people. Welcome back. It's another wonderful day on the boat. Any day on the boat is a good day. And I've got a number of things I'd like to show you. But first and foremost, you need to examine which intruders have been on the boat while I was away. Put our detective hats on and start looking for clues. What? Why are you shouting at me? Clue number 1. Looks like goose down. I don't know why any self-respecting goose would think that my winch cover is a good place to make a nest, but apparently it is. Antics of wildlife aside, work is progressing on the boat. So there's too many to just list off, so I think I'll show you. This is my propane locker. I've got it painted inside and out with primer, nothing fancy. And it's ready basically to have the propane fittings installed. Work on the cockpit area is progressing nicely. This is an old vent hole that I plugged up with a little bit of fiberglass and thickened epoxy. Same for the old autopilot control. And this guy, that's where the throttle and transmission control lives. I kind of cut it up when I removed it, and the new one that I have requires a much bigger hole here, so I don't need to bother sanding this down and fairing it, what have you. Otherwise I would. And I have ground down epoxy and put fairing material on the old fuel fill. The old shift lever was beyond repair. It was so badly corroded. I'm not even going to show you. It was just welded together, and I had to use a zip disc, a cutoff disc, to actually remove the thing. So that, of course, meant that I needed to buy a new throttle shift lever. Not cheap, but there it is. This is the guts for it. This little shaft will poke through the hole, and this is the shape of the hole that I need to cut. So that's the new shift lever, cover, handle. And along with the new shift lever comes new cables. The old cable was actually the culprit that caused this project to happen when the end of it bent. So I thought, if I'm going to buy one, might as well buy two. So I got two. We will have new shift and throttle control cables in place. So today's project will hopefully involve putting those things back together. And I have one more item that I'd like to show you. I have been thinking about a solution for the cockpit hatch. The cockpit hatch has never been fastened down or sealed since I've owned the boat, and there is no gasket to prevent seawater ingressing in case of a wave coming aboard. And that has to be addressed. So the issue with the cockpit hatch is that there's holes all around the hatch, and there's holes all around the cockpit where the hatch sits. But in order to fasten it down, you need a bolt and a nut underneath. But once the cockpit hatch is down, it's kind of hard to get to the, like, basically it'd be a two-person job, and one would have to be a monkey in order to crawl into the engine compartment and hold a nut up underneath while somebody else screwed a screw down. So the solution that I came up with is fairly simple, and I hope fairly effective. Screw, fiberglass nut. My welding buddy has some very nice tools, including a lathe. So I took some old G10. In a previous episode, I showed how I used G10 for backing plates for my through hulls, and I had some left over, which I cleverly kept. It's been sitting here in the galley for a couple of years. So I used a hole saw, drilled out little plugs like that. And then he has a lathe which we use to drill and put a tap into to create a fiberglass nut. Now the joy of a fiberglass nut is that it can be fiberglassed. So I am going to use some thickened epoxy and these screws, because I don't have 10 clamps to clamp them, and I'm going to basically glue them up underneath the rim of the cockpit hatch so that I can remove and replace the cockpit hatch as I see fit, all by myself. So I think that's a fairly workable solution. The other part of the solution is I'm going to take these screws back to my buddy with the machine shop, and we will machine a little groove underneath the head of the screw so that I can put an O-ring over the shaft, and when the screw tightens down on the hatch, that O-ring will seal it. So that'll prevent water coming in around the screw, and then I will put a gasket made out of the rubber material that I used underneath the gas tank. This stuff here, it's probably 3/16 thick, and once it's laid down flat, cut to shape, I'm sure that'll make a rather effective watertight gasket. That should hold the sea out. That's kind of the point anyways. So those are my bits and pieces that I've got to deal with. Time is getting a little bit later in the day. I had to do a bunch of running around to get all these parts this morning. So I need to get busy and make it happen. I think first thing I will do is put the nuts in place. Oh, I didn't show you this. The new improved mast gate. It's not hinged. And my plan is simply to get a pair of thumb screws, drill holes top and bottom, and just have a mechanical mast gate. So I'm going to test fit that, make sure it fits okay. But I won't get that installed today. I went down to the fastener, the chandlery, looking for thumb screws, and they didn't have any. So I've got to source some thumb screws before I can put that in. Anyway, I'm going to go see if it fits. So far, so good. I've got the old holes filled with fiberglass cloth and a little bit of thickened epoxy, and I've got my T10 nuts secured in place. Now, I am a little bit concerned that when the thickened epoxy kicks off, it will trap the screws inside the nuts. So once it gets to a point where the thickened epoxy is hardened sufficiently that I can turn the screws out, I'm going to turn the screws out, get them out of there so that they don't get screwed into place and I have to end up drilling them out or something like that. So my next task is to cut the opening for the new control system. I'm a little nervous about doing that, but it's got to be done. There's nobody else going to do it, so let's get at it. I'll use the time while I'm doing that to wait for the epoxy to kick off. We'll see how that goes. Step 1, cut out the template. Step 2, mount the template in the right position. Step 3, cut the hole. Step 3, mount the cables on the control unit. Oh, and pat yourself on the back for not messing up cutting a whopping great hole in the side of your boat. Step 5, or whatever step this is, hook up the cables.